Guess what my mother's maiden name means in Gaelic?
War. Hammer.
Bald guy.
No, it does not.
Not kidding.
It does not.
Milligan means bald guy. It's usually in reference to like priesthood and stuff like that, but yeah.
That's incredible.
Yep.
Dude, you are the prophecy. Hey everybody, welcome back to Human Reaction, episode 76.
1776 will commence again.
We figured it was a special one to celebrate. So, welcome back. Thanks for joining us on your weekly source for independent commentary on cultural news and politics, where it's always our mission to arm you with the tools you need to resist media misdirection and cut through the... Fuck.
You got it backwards, but it still works. It still works either way.
It still worked.
Resist media misdirection.
Anyways, lots of stuff for us to get to. But before we get started, please do like, follow, subscribe, and give us a review wherever you might be tuning in from. We would love to thank our members. Those of you who are supporting the show financially, we could not do without you. If you would like to become a member, go to humanreactionpod.com to sign up. We will be doing a special nuclear reactors members only show after this episode. So for those of you that are paying, you're going to get to see that. We're going to be talking about why women are more afraid of men than bears when they encounter them in the woods, why conservatives and trads hate the new Apple commercial, and the fact that RFK is challenging Trump to a debate at the Libertarian National Convention. But before we get into all that stuff, David, what are we talking about today?
Well, Chris Cuomo wants us to be less mean to him about being a propagandist for the establishment thought for the last 10 years, however long he's been in media.
Like 50?
Canada still hates freedom of speech, believe it or not. And last topic, come out ye black and tans. The Irish rebel against Ukrainian refugees flooding their country, and lots of other stuff going on with the TikTok ban. Some updates on that's happening, as well as Rafah and Palestine and Israel.
And before we get into all that, join our Discord, where we talk about news and post dank memes. Here's a dank meme from one of our supporters, Adam, who just put out how my YouTube goes typically. Right-wing YouTubers with millions of subscribers, has Ben Shapiro. Watch this 5 minutes of me reacting to 2 TikToks while I shill ExpressVPN for 4 minutes. And then right-wing YouTubers with thousands of subscribers. Hello, welcome to my 5-hour, 1,000 subscribers special. Today I will discuss the ancient Greek, Persian, and Indian civilizations and compare them to West and the theories of Carl Jung, Oswald Spengler, and Ibn Khaldun.
Which is certainly more where we are, I guess, than anything.
Something like that.
And we will be thrilled once we get to 1,000 subscribers. We're flirting with that. We've been fighting for 1,000 for weeks now. I think it's 955 or something like that.
951.
Yeah.
We've lost a couple. Damn it. Yeah.
They lost us.
What was that?
Whoa.
It's actually 953. I refreshed the page and then...
we're back. We're so back.
We're so back.
If you are a small business owner looking for exponential growth, you have to connect with Adam Thuen at Intellectual Patriots. He will revolutionize your business game and help you get to the next level. Adam can streamline your business practices and advertising strategies to improve your bottom line. His expertise in data engineering means he can build you the systems you need to collect and analyze market data. His mission is to provide you with invaluable insights to fuel your success. From grant writing and business proposals to digital systems integrations, even AI management. Intellectual Patriots is a one-stop shop for cutting-edge solutions. Don't wait another second. Visit intelpatriots.com to learn more. That's INTEL Patriots.com. This episode is brought to you by Revved Up Promo, the official apparel partner of Human Reaction. Revved Up is a premier full-service shop specializing in laser engraving, screen printing, and embroidery. Not only are they now making all of our apparel right down the road from us, they can do the same for your brand and ship it to you anywhere in the world. Revved Up helps you navigate the extensive universe of merch options and uses state-of-the-art techniques to showcase your brand in its very best light. So if you want to support our show and our generous sponsor, you can now do so by buying our merch and by turning to Revved Up Promo for your own custom apparel needs. Reach them at revveduppromo.com. That's with 2 V's and 2 P's, or just check the show notes for a link. David, let's get into our first story. What are we talking about?
So we have this clip from Patrick Ben-David's show with Chris Cuomo on who's over at where's Chris Cuomo at nowadays?
News Nation?
News Nation, whatever that is.
They're the ones that dropped all the alien news. They're the ones that got all
right.
the leaks from it. Like they just kind of came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden they're like, "Hey, we have all the alien news." Like it's just interesting how that shows up like that, right?
Huh. It could have just been how they got big. But anyway, so he was on, and they just watched a video of Chris Cuomo and Representative Byron Donalds, where Cuomo claims Donalds was pretty much a bad leader for not being vaccinated. He gives him, you would recognize the rhetoric at the time. It was, you're selfish because you aren't getting vaccinated, and you're not being a good leader for not getting vaccinated to show the rubes that it's okay for leaders to get vaccinated. You remember this argument?
Yep.
So this is what Chris Cuomo just got done doing with this person as he's interviewing him. And then Patrick Ben-David comes back with this question to him.
From that conversation with you and Byron to where you are today?
Well, a lot has changed, and a lot needs to change that hasn't. Here's what matters to me about the clip. Apology? Of course not. Byron Donalds comes on my show now, okay? Why? Exchange of respect. Was never personal. I believe as a leader at that time, you had a duty to be thorough in what you were putting out there as opposed to just playing politics, okay? This was never as simple as vaccine good, vaccine bad. Politics made it that. And it put us into a toxic environment, no pun intended, where even today, there's no curiosity about the vaccine. You get a VAERS system, which is very imperfect, and you don't have robust government dialogue or investigation of the vaccine. You don't have political investigation of what happened during the pandemic, what was right, what was wrong, to Vinny's point about what's still continuing, about who wants to control what. Because they only see politics. They only see advantage. My concern is that the unknowns are now more dangerous than the knowns. So what's changed since then?
So we'll just pause it there. Very different tune than what I'm used to from Chris Cuomo, right?
Yeah. I mean, I find it interesting that he's saying, well, it's all politics that made it good versus bad. Well, he played right into that. He was on the other side of that just a couple of years ago.
And refusing to apologize because the guys still come on your show. Well, wait, you were a propagandist.
Yeah.
You were the worst actor in this area of taking somebody who is saying, I'm not saying no one else shouldn't be able to get a vaccine. I'm not telling anybody what to do, but I'm not going to do it because I don't think it's the right choice for me after talking to my medical professionals. And you were the one saying that's irresponsible because everyone should get the vaccine, because if you don't get the vaccine, because if you get the vaccine, you won't be able to transmit it, which was a complete fabrication.
It was. And furthermore, for him to say that there was no interest in investigating it, well, isn't that the media's job? Right?
At the time, especially.
Shouldn't they have been looking into, what we know and what we don't know about the vaccine when it was so new? But they were just caught up in the narrative. He was just spitting the narrative.
They had certain sponsors that they had to respond to, right?
Who will not be named for fear of retribution.
But we'll keep going here.
I don't have long vaccine. People are saying
long COVID.
I've admitted long vaccine.
Oh, okay.
People are saying I've admitted that the vaccine hurt me. I have not admitted that. I don't know that. Do I now believe that we have data to support the fact that there are thousands of people who have had adverse effects that are not getting attention, let alone treatment? Yes. And I fault government for that. I do have what they call long COVID. Now, I say they call because the government, it's funny, after that clip, I got called by...
What the hell is he talking about? I don't have long vaccine. I mean, long COVID. No, not long COVID, long vaccine. And then they just says, but I do have long COVID just now. Is that just me? Am I the crazy person here?
Well, and this is the insanity of the situation, if I may, because the same component, the spike protein, is the toxic part of the virus and of the vaccine. The only difference is the delivery mechanism. In one case, you got it from a wild virus, right? And in the other case, you were injected with mRNA that caused your body to produce that thing, which is what's injuring people across the board. So long COVID is long vaccine. It's all the same to me.
I think he's just getting confused with his own jargon. Like, well, and it's also just like the jargon of everything, right?
Right.
Is like, 'cause you have these terms that we all kind of like learned in recent years, like long COVID, long vaccine. You have these terms, and I think he's just kind of mixing them up in his head as he's trying to keep it all straight while he's talking. Like, I think he's just fumbling what he's saying.
Well, this
right
is
there.
the first time I've ever heard of lung vaccine.
I've never heard of it
I've
before.
never
either.
heard that phrase before.
Neither have I. I think what he's referring to is just vaccine injury in general.
Right.
Which is obviously like off the charts.
Which he says he has. He says that he has, or long COVID. I don't know what he says, but
He said he did not have lung vaccine.
Yeah, which he will be getting into in a minute. But he's basically acknowledging first that he pushed these things, but then not apologizing for pushing these things because it was just politics made it bad, and he's not at all responsible.
Well, and the
for that.
information changed too, right? Like that's what
But
you
the
always.
information didn't change.
No, but that's what is always the case that is made as well. No, all you people that were kind of anti this back in the day, you were just following your influencers and you weren't actually using real information. We were using the information that was given to us at the time. That's always kind of the argument.
which was also not real information. I mean, more, I would argue less real information than the people who were skeptical of the situation, because at least those people were honest about what they knew and didn't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also if you if you listen to a lot of the skeptics at the time, people like Tom Woods or people that I think of, he got very popular being a skeptic on the COVID stuff, great libertarian podcaster. The information was there, and he's documented in his book recently. He has Diaries of a Psychosis, or is that what it's called?
Yeah, I do want to read that.
Yeah, and he kind of documents how all the information actually was at the time, and it's like, if you looked at it, the information was kind of there. But
Well, yeah, I mean, it was coming from clinicians on the ground, which Cuomo gets into. They knew that things like ivermectin were obviously safe and seemingly effective. And then, you have the powers that be, the government, whoever, with, the mouthpiece being the media and Chris Cuomo saying, "Oh, nope, that you can't do that. That's stupid. Don't take horse dewormer."
Classic.
it's horse based. Yeah, it's like,
Anyway.
don't listen to Joe Rogan. And remember at the time, they painted, I think it was MSNBC, maybe it was CNN, because Chris Cuomo was CNN at the time with Don Lemon.
right.
They had their bromance that was going on all the time, which was just a wild time. If you think back to this time where you have this guy's brother being the governor of New York, and everybody's like sitting there just waiting at their TVs every morning, waiting to see if they can go outside or not. And then you have him and Don Lemon just having this like weird bromance on TV, just like, it was everything about that era was just
shaming people for killing grandma because they didn't get the vaccine. How
dare you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah, and then he got ousted because I always have the conspiracy that he went against a lot of UN stuff, and then that's when all the sexual allegations got dropped on him. Because I think he was getting groomed for president at the time.
Ooh.
And then, nope, we lost you.
Pulled that carrot.
Let's keep going because he goes into the ivermectin stuff here, right?
By government people bitching at me because I said that the vaccine wasn't perfect. So that's where we were then. That's where we were
truth teller.
They say, "Hey, Chris, easy on the long COVID. We don't know that it's a thing. We don't know. We're still trying to figure it out. It could be other things, autoimmune." So I'm saying my doctors say I have long COVID. I have the symptoms. They showed me my blood work. Scared.
He just said he didn't
the
have long
bejesus out of me to see this
His long vaccine.
glowing micro clot stuff that they see in my blood. That it really shook me up. So I'm doing all the protocols. My doctor, Terrain Health, they're an international consortium because they have to do it themselves because the government's not giving them any guidance. The vaccine is a really important conversation that's being ignored. I do not fault myself for telling people at the time what the government was giving us as best practices. People say, but your job is to question.
This is the thing that really ticks me off, is what he's just about to say, is that in this whole framework that the government was telling us what was going on, and I trust the government. That is the crisis of reporting that we're suffering from right now, right? That's the crux of it. It used to be, as a reporter, you started out with a beat. You would build up your career by reporting on the government in your localized beat. You would learn that your government actually exists to lie to you, to make you feel comfortable, not to actually tell you the truth, so that by the time you become a desk person at this high level, you would have built up some skepticism towards your own government. He doesn't do that because he's a partisan hack.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, and one of the biggest themes in our podcast is, dispelling all the narratives that are portrayed in the media and kind of a lot of things where we have these intelligence operations that influence media, right? We've talked about things like Operation Mockingbird. And when you think about this, how easy it is to actually control the media when you have guys like this that are just, they're not reporting on the lies of the government. They're just reporting on the data that is provided to them. Like, that is how you capture the narrative
by the government, right?
Yeah.
And then additionally to that, ignoring the stuff that was inconvenient at the time and specifically saying, limiting the field of view to just what they think it should be. Limiting the field of view itself is a big part of it by just saying that's not newsworthy or saying that's not relevant to the data or to the case or what's important right now.
Well, yeah, because Dave, you always use the term when we're talking about foreign policy, the keyhole problem.
Yeah.
Is like there's a very specific, you have a whole picture, but you're just looking at it through a keyhole. So like this is the framework that you're able to see things in, and everything beyond that, you can't. It's not within the field of view because they don't necessarily allow it to be in the field of view because it's not what's being said on the news. It's not so like the average person just like, oh, that seems like a big problem because they're just looking at it through that very specific lens, right?
And I think it's unfair for him to come on a show like this and try to abdicate himself of all of his journalistic responsibility that he didn't carry out in that role of just being a government mouthpiece. He's asking for forgiveness, effectively saying, well, I was just doing what the government told me to do. Well, like, that's bullshit. I'm sorry. And no, I'm not just going to let you off the hook. You led a lot of people to a lot of substantial harm. And was it his fault entirely? No, but he could have and should have done a better job, and the whole media could have done a better job.
And that's where it takes me off that he won't apologize. That makes me mad, right? Is that thing like, I don't have to apologize? Like, no.
I don't blame myself.
Yeah,
I bet you don't. Fucking asshole.
Keep going.
On what basis? The basis of questioning early on was because I say so. Because you don't get to tell me what to do and not do. Fine, I say. You are right. I said it then. However, you can't expect to be everywhere and do everything that the government is controlling because you're not going to. Your kids aren't going to be able to be in school, just like is true today in terms of what your state's vaccine protocol is. That was my point. What this guy and others want me to do is to say, I was wrong, the vaccine is bad. I'm not going to say that. The data is overwhelming that when the vaccine entered our population, the people going into the hospital with very serious or eventually terminal cases was reduced. Now, at what cost?
You have something to say, Joe?
I don't have data to back that up, but that doesn't strike me as true.
I wish you weren't a liar.
Regardless to me, even if that were true, that's an ends justify the means question, right? If you had to shut down the economy or shut down people's livelihoods to force them into vaccination or to force them into COVID compliance protocols in order to get that result, was it worth it?
Yeah.
If someone committed suicide because of isolation and losing their business, they didn't die of COVID, is that a win? I don't know.
Yeah.
We do know that poisonings and suicides went up substantially during COVID. And
the other piece of it is the all-cause mortality piece, which is that no matter how many people, were saved potentially from dying of COVID during that time, all of the reasons that humans die in the United States and many other countries around the world has gone up substantially since COVID. So to your point, was it worth it? I don't think so. I mean, did it work? I don't know that it did.
And it's extremely precarious place to place your moral thinking is, well, the ends justified the means. It was worth it because we ended it. I lied to everybody and told them that it was horse dewormer and these things and said, don't try to cure it yourself and how dare you, and try to shame everybody from taking the vaccine. But it was all worth it because then people took the vaccine and they saved more lives. Well, maybe not. And you're going to base your entire thesis not on consent, not on people's freely being rationally convincing them, using data and good argumentation and integrity, but instead you had to lie to them, right? And then you use that to the justification for your lie.
And I don't even know that we can say he outright lied. We don't know that he had information that he knew was one way and said the opposite. But what he didn't do was due diligence of any sort.
I would say lie may not be the right word. Manipulate? I mean, if I say I don't know, the government is claiming, okay, so if my job as a reporter is to hold the government accountable, to be the third estate, right? And I got information from the government said, oh yeah, from Fauci, God, with all the contradictions, we already knew that all the conflict of interest that he had, that the infection was claimed to limit spread, and I didn't question that at all. And instead I just repeated that and then I shame people who did. There's something that's maybe not lying, but manipulating.
For sure.
That's somewhere in that field that to me seems unvirtuous. Like is an abdication of your moral responsibility as a member of the press. And with that, if you say, I still don't apologize, in fact, I had to do it because the ends justify the means, that's where you're the problem.
Yep, I agree.
I'm reminded of, there was a clip from Noam Chomsky, and he was asked, he was being interviewed about his book, Manufacturing Consent. And he was being asked, like, do you really think that, like, all of these journalists are kind of like in on the problem that you're talking about here and all this stuff? And he's like, no. It's not that you're like necessarily in on it or you're like purposely doing these things. It's your extreme lack of curiosity, which is the reason why you have the job. Like, so because you're more easy to control, and that's how they manufacture consent across societies, because the people that are the mouthpieces on allowable information are very uncurious about the machinations of and the malevolence that is happening within these like government apparatuses.
I'm not certain that you could be truly curious and actually matriculate through a media organization in any effective way, because, you know, if you start asking the wrong questions, if you start saying the wrong things, a la Tucker Carlson, perhaps, you get the boot, because the people that are running the media organization are very close with the people in government, and they're all intertwined. And of course they don't want their club to be disrupted by some pesky do-gooder journalist who's actually doing their job.
Right. I mean, you might have the Queen of England call and say, hey, you can't run that story.
Well, I want to interrupt this clip real quick because I was just reminded of a moment with Chris Cuomo back in 2016 when the WikiLeaks stuff happened. There's this very fun clip of Cuomo.
We should play this every session, every show we should play this one.
It really encapsulates everything right here. So the context around this clip is the WikiLeaks dropped. It's like the DNC convention and Hillary Clinton emails and Seth Rich dying at the DNC convention and all this stuff, right? And this is what Chris Cuomo had to say when WikiLeaks dropped the documents.
Also interesting is, remember, it's illegal to possess these stolen documents. It's different for the media. So everything you learn about this, you're learning from us. And in full disclosure, let's take a look at what is in there and what it means. Joining us now, CN.
Right. That's all you really need to know.
Cue the clown music. Right. Oh, God.
All right. Keep going with this clip.
Yes, let's go.
And why? We don't know. Am I open to that? Yes. If I were a propagandist, I wouldn't be doing the reporting that I'm doing right now. I started a Substack that is only about this, where I am letting you see what my doctor is saying and what we're doing on my own dime, because I believe in it. I'll tell you something else that's going to get you a lot of hits. I am taking
it's good television.
What do they call it? Like a regular dose, whatever. They're trying to build up of ivermectin. Ivermectin was a boogeyman early on in COVID.
You can
tell us more about that.
That was wrong. We were given bad information about ivermectin. The real question is why? Everyone's going to say Joe Rogan was right. No, Joe Rogan was saying, yeah, he was right. But that's not what matters. What matters is the entire clinical community knew that ivermectin couldn't hurt you. They knew it, Patrick. I know they knew it. How do I know? Because now I'm doing nothing but talking to these clinicians who at the time were overwhelmed by COVID, and they weren't saying anything. Not that they were hiding anything, but it's cheap, it's not owned by anybody, and it's used as an antimicrobial, antiviral in all of these different ways, and has been for a long time.
For malaria for over almost 20 years.
Yeah. So, and my doctor, who is now my doctor, was using it during COVID on her family and on patients, and it was working for them. So they were wrong to play scared on that. Didn't know that.
Okay, can we go right to the other clip of him and Don Lemon?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's just remember where we were at then.
I guess Bennett just clipped directly to this, I guess.
People who are injecting drugs for animals and horse.
And people telling them to. Oh my God. What person? You talk about cancel culture and who to shame. Ivermectin, a dewormer, really?
They are shaming themselves. No one has to shame them. They're shaming themselves.
No, they need to be shamed.
Yeah.
They need to be called out and shamed, brother.
People who are getting
called out and shamed.
I
Very different person.
I wonder why doctors weren't talking about it because anyone who fucking did got canceled and like labeled a like alternative fact conspiracy.
He said,
yeah, it's the doctor's fault. Why weren't the doctors speaking up? As he's over here is like, people who do this should be shamed out of polite society.
The disingenuousness here is just so irritating to me that he's practically groveling on Patrick Bet-David's show, begging this audience to not hold him accountable for all the terrible information that he gave to people and the terrible opinions that he put out on TV for years. No, Chris Cuomo.
You suck.
You
Go
suck.
away.
And this is when the Joe Rogan he got painted green basically on the media when because Rogan got COVID and he was down for like a day or two, but then he got thrown at everything. He took like ivermectin. He took literally everything.
Hydroxychloroquine.
Do we have the picture of what he actually looked like? Because it's so obvious that they desaturated this.
Yeah,
I mean,
just at a quick search, I'm not seeing the side by side.
Well,
but
You can
see if we can
do it. Just do a picture of me like this. Picture of me with low saturation.
Bennett, pull it up in post.
Been taking ivermectin. I turned into the Hulk. Yeah. So yeah, it's so ridiculous, and the fact that he can't even get straight whether or not Joe Rogan is the good guy here, because he's like, Joe Rogan just did it just to be cool, right? I mean, like, it's kind of how he comes across. It's like, oh, just people, you just think you're cool because you don't trust the government. Well, I go on the real data. It's like, no, you're a tool. That's what it is, and like, you just can't deal with the fact that you were caught so out in the open being shameful while trying to shame everybody.
Yes. Yep.
Who just disagreed with you about public policy. And the crazy thing here is only one side wanted to use force. Only one side of this said, no, you don't have a choice. And they are still trying to pretend like they're the good guys.
Yeah.
The other side was just said, just leave me alone. Just don't force me. Just allow me to send my kids to school. Just allow me to live my life. And the other side was saying, no, you can't do that. Because if you try to do that, you're selfish.
And you may recall, and I put this in the doc, October 31st of 22, there was an article in the Atlantic titled, "Let's Declare a Pandemic Amnesty. Let's focus on the future and fix the problems we still need to solve." This type of thing has been going on for a couple of years now, where people who were on that authoritarian side have been trying to re-ingratiate themselves with the people who they literally said should go to jail if they didn't take a particular medical intervention. Ridiculous.
What should we do about them? Well, how should we think about this?
We should shame them.
Shame them, brother.
Well, look, okay, so let me take the other side of this real quick, just so that we have something to go on here. I think Chris Cuomo at least is attempting somewhere in here to take some about, because he is documenting his long COVID or long vaccine or whatever, because he is kind of admitting that Joe Rogan was right, even though he does so like a little weasel, that there's some amount of virtue in that. There's some amount of like, mea culpa in there that I think should be rewarded with acknowledgement.
I agree.
It should be good for you. Go away. Don't ever come back. You're a plumber now.
Your credibility is gone.
It is interesting watching guys like him and Don Lemon now become alternative media figures, right? Because Don Lemon got fired, and now he's got Vivek just cut him down real good.
You're brown. That's all I need to know.
That was, remember Don Lemon said to Vivek, "And whatever you are," right?
Do we need
like he'd never seen an Indian person before in his life. Like, it's like,
whatever you are.
Do we need to play this clip so the viewers have a context of what we're talking about? Because this was a while ago.
It was.
Vivek appears.
We talked about it when it happened. It was hilarious.
He appeared on Don Lemon's show, and what exactly transpired? We can just describe it. What went down?
They got into a debate about. There was some race topic. It was a kind of a long debate. It was like long for corporate news lengths, it was like kind of lengthy. And Don Lemon, he had like an earpiece on, and they kept trying to like tell him to like, shut up basically. And he's just like, no, get out of my ear. Like he started like yelling at the producers on the other end. Like it was wild.
Wild.
Yeah. So anyways,
yeah,
those guys have kind of came out of traditional media, are now alternative media figures in our direct competition. So the question is, Why is that a legitimate transformation on their point? To have they changed at all? Well, if you look at Don Lemon and the way he tried to cover Elon Musk, he's still a complete hack.
That interview was
cringy.
It was rough.
Yeah.
But I do think there might be something slightly different going on with Chris Cuomo. I thought his interview with Tucker was relatively good and relatively interesting, and there was a lot more humility in that interview than there was with Patrick Bet-David.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So
I think there's potential of some genuine transformation. Like, I think Don Lemon still really has CNN brain. Like his brain is wired for CNN, and it shows in the way that he covered the Elon Musk interview and when he had a Swisher on after to talk about it. I think Cuomo's like less CNN brained. So like he is kind of branching out and going more into the outside the mainstream area, and I think his thoughts are changing, and I think some of that might be genuine, but I think there is kind of like the look back of who I was, where he still has to kind of defend his old self in a lot of ways, and I think that's where this defensiveness
still feels like he's trying to justify everything. I do, like you guys said, I do give credit where he's saying, maybe he wasn't correct, which clearly he was not, because I don't think enough people do that. So I do give him that sense of credit, but it's like he's justifying everything at the same time. So it's frustrating.
It's not a real admission of any sort of wrongdoing at all. I mean, you look at a guy like Tucker who says, I supported the war in Iraq, and that was wrong, and I was dumb for that, and I regret that tremendously. And I believe these things now. Like, that's not what Chris Cuomo's doing. He's trying to save face, and he's trying to, I think, position himself from a branding perspective as no longer mainstream media. Now he's this like independent guy. But I think that that's really calculated, and I don't see that it's fully genuine yet. He'll have to do a lot more proving to get me to come around on who I think he's trying to portray himself as.
You always have the fallback of, I was listening to the data at the time. Like, that is always there was a very narrow keyhole of data, and I was listening to that data, and so it's more so that they tricked me, not so necessarily that I was wrong. Like, and you have that kind of fallback, and that's the mental games that you have in the mind.
But that abdication of responsibility, that's the sticking point. And when you look at somebody, what's the Batman? Like, you always know the squealers, right? Out of the group, they're gonna squeal, who's gonna press. When I look at that guy, squealer, right? Like, he's just that guy. He's gonna sell out at the next possible opportunity to make a buck, to spin a story. Because he at no point in here does he demonstrate any amount of actual like responsibility for his own goddamn actions, like an adult.
And not that I had any trust in him prior, but I certainly don't have faith that this is a genuine argument that he's making here.
Well, and this is the thing, is there's a lot of these major events that have happened, and COVID is just one of them, but other major things like, I don't know, Ukraine, Russia, or like pick a major event that's happened in the last decade, right? And you have people, even on quote unquote our side, right, where their initial instincts were very wrong, and it makes you kind of like, you go back and you remember that, and you're like, oh, I might not trust your opinion when the next major thing happens. But then they're right like a year later, like they catch up to being right, and then they kind of have like, then they usually have these like, well, I was going on what was going on at the time and the information that was presented, and those happen all the time. A guy like Piers Morgan is one of those examples, right? Where he tends to be right like 5 years after the fact,
which is too little, too late.
Yeah, exactly.
And you see things like this happen all the time in politics and media, where really it's the general just getting in front of the army in whatever direction they're marching, right? He feels the wind is changing. It's been changing, and so he's just trying to.
1776 will commence again.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
And he's just trying to get in front of the army. At this point, that's my view on it. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Zesty Beverages. They're on a mission to unf the standard American diet by crafting drinks with fewer calories and more nutrients from real food. Their lineup of delicious offerings now includes Electric Peak Yerba Mate, postbiotic sodas, keto-friendly, ready-to-drink margaritas, and hard teas. Wondering what a postbiotic soda is? Well, head on over to zestybev.com to learn more and find a retailer near you. Once again, check them out online at zestybev.com. That's ZESTYBEV.com.
All right. Speaking of which, an army of Canadians is marching in from the northern border. No, they're not doing that. They're actually, it's a prison country now that has no free speech rights at all at this point. So what's going on in Canada? Is it okay to say Canuck? Is that okay? Can I say the Canucks?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
You got to ask the Canadian.
I had to ask.
It's a hockey team.
As long as I have a card, right? I just don't have a Canadian card. Okay, so
What about Knuckleheads?
I like that.
I don't know about that one. That feels more gross to me.
So let's go to the back to the beginning, and we got from the CBC, pretty much their PBS, right? A breakdown of online harms bill C-63.
To make its case for its new law against harmful internet content, the government turned to those impacted.
I may be one mother,
including this mother whose daughter was sexually assaulted with the images shared online while in kindergarten.
She was told or taught to believe that sex or sexual actions between children and grown-ups was completely acceptable and normal.
Or this black entrepreneur who says she was insulted online.
On a utilisé le mot en haine à volonté.
They called me the N-word repeatedly, she said. The Online Harms Act would recognize 7 categories of harmful content, including content that sexually victimizes a child or re-victimizes a survivor, or is used to bully a child, incites violent extremism or terrorism, or foments hatred.
I'm terrified by the dangers that lurk on the internet for our children. We have rigorous safety standards for things like my son's Lego at home. Yet somehow, none for the most dangerous toy, the screen that is in front of our children's faces.
That's where I meant to pause.
All right. So do you notice the manipulation in the subtlety there? What did they talk about there? They talked about some horrific stuff, right?
Yeah,
some
sexual assault, bullying children, all sorts of incitement to terrorism,
racism.
And then right at the bottom,
foments hatred.
What is that?
Interesting question. So I do want to point, what's interesting here is a lot of these things are already illegal. There's already Canada hate speech laws, but they don't apply online per se quite like they want it to. At least it doesn't match well with the existing code. There was some interesting stuff, obviously child pornography is already banned online in Canada, but the child bullying, and then there's some new stuff around revenge porn specifically, and deepfake explicit imagery, that's what they're referencing for some of those other, it's a pretty big bill that covers a lot of ground. It lowers the standard for the prosecution of all these things from a regular standard to a new standard that they're kind of inventing for this called reasonable suspicion. So just saying you have to take it down as there's a reasonable suspicion that this new board that they're going to establish has that it falls within the categories. So a lot of this stuff is completely, most people would be supportive of, right? Getting rid of, people who are advocating for violence on the internet, saying, "Hey, we're going to go, mess up this guy's house, right, or business or whatever."
Right. Actual actions.
Or speech that could reasonably lead to that, right?
Sure.
Saying, "Let's go firebomb a place" is banned speech.
Yeah.
Right.
Which makes sense.
No one. Yeah, this is one of those things that always get hazy in people's minds about free speech issues.
Verbs are hard.
And where it gets the sticking point, right? Where it's being covered as a problem for free speech is the hate speech provision. And I'll read it real quick because I think it is revelatory. Quote, content that foments hatred means content that expresses detestation or vilification of an individual or group of individuals on the basis of a prohibited ground of discrimination within the meaning of the Canadian Human Rights Act. And that, given the context in which it is communicated, is likely to foment detestation or vilification of an individual or group of individuals on the basis of such a prohibited ground. Right? So if you say something about a certain group
that might make other people dislike a group or a person.
Yeah.
Well, it's not even about a group. It can be an individual of a group.
Sure.
Yes.
Too, right?
Or a group made up of individuals. It's just a group.
Yeah. but within a prescribed definition that's within the Canadian Human Rights Act. So
that's right.
So
it's not going to apply to white people. That's what it means. So let's just be clear here. It's not. Okay, so your DEI program is safe.
If it's a protected class and they have right.
Well, and that's the specific thing is that it says here, on the basis of a prohibited ground of discrimination. So only those things. So if I said, I don't like bald people because they scare me, Would that count?
That would not count.
He's not a
Okay.
protected class.
Not a protected
okay.
class.
All right.
Not within the Canadian Human Rights Act. At least that I'm aware
the
of.
unhaired people.
You could say that in Canada, and they won't take down your post.
I think you should probably work on getting
unhaired?
bald people to become a marginalized group.
But now, what's the color of his skin?
The unhaired.
Yeah, see,
Right, like
that's what matters
it
most.
depends on which race or his sexual orientation. Then that changes. Like if Dave was two-spirited, right, and then you started saying that I don't like bald people, well, that would be vilifying somebody of a particular protected class within the human rights, within the Canadian Human Rights Act, and then that would be creating disdain and detestation, right? I think that's where that would.
So this is
go.
basically codifying.
It's a lot of jargon.
Even stricter controls around what can be said about people who are or groups who are counted under these protected classes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, remember back in the day, because when Canadian free speech stuff got really, everyone started to know about it, was when Jordan Peterson rose to fame, was in like 2016
Socrates
era. Yeah, Socrates himself.
How dare you?
How dare you? When the Socrates of Canada came up.
For those of you that don't get the reference, Kyle went viral as Kyle's ever gone, for comparing Jordan Peterson to the Socrates of our time. Got a lot of hate on TikTok from that. A lot of support though too.
Yeah, well, I still stand by like very similar stories. Like, I'm not changing my opinion on that.
I'm not apologizing.
I'm not apologizing.
I don't blame myself for my views.
I was going with the information I had at the time. And that was with Bill C-16, which falls under the same type of Canadian human rights violations, all this stuff, where there was like a mandated pronoun usage that he would have to use, and you get into this. It's not necessarily even speech that you can't say; it's speech that you have to say. You are legally required to use this speech, and so there's an enforcement of language, which is the thing that he was very objecting to at the time. And Canada's only gotten worse since then.
Yeah, in fact, back then he used to say, "Hey, I'm okay with hate speech laws. I just don't want compelled speech." And I remember back then being like, "But are you though?" I kind of feel like hate speech law is a bit of a problem, don't you? I mean,
he's just trying to create some common ground, right?
Yeah, right.
Like,
and he's Canadian, right? Like,
but he's Canadian.
Yeah, they got.
So he's nice.
Yeah,
he says sorry.
Exactly. Sorry.
I don't know. He's Northern Albertan. That's like a different breed up there.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair. That's like the south of Canada.
Except for it's the north.
Well, it's inverted because it's Canada. Everything's the opposite.
It's the opposite world.
Well, yeah, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. That's like redneck America right there.
Yeah.
That's how that works. That's flyover country of Canada. Well, they have
nice
the same
part, then.
they have the same coastal elite problem that America has, with then the flyover breadbasket of the country is the three provinces in the middle.
So one of the other things it does is it amends the criminal code in a very particular way I think is interesting. Part 2 amends it with A, B, C, and D different provisions. The A division is quote, create a hate crime offense by committing an offense under the act or any other act of parliament that is motivated by hatred based on certain factors. Those factors being create a recognized to keep recognizance. Oh wow. Create a recognizance to keep the peace relating to hate propaganda and hate crime offenses. So hate propaganda is what's now regulated online. Define, quote, hatred, end quote, for the purposes of the new offense, the hate propaganda offenses. That's this new, term that they're inventing. Increases maximum sentence for the hate propaganda offenses. So this whole new category of hate propaganda is one of the things you could basically fall into by talking about regular things, right? Even if you don't mean to. If you're just talking about anything demographically, it could fall into hate propaganda in theory.
That is pretty scary.
Yeah. So we have a clip from the Canadian Constitution Foundation kind of getting into their concerns about this. And I do want to highlight this group. I think it's a very interesting group. I did some research on, looked into kind of what they're about, and they have some pretty good products out there. If you're Canadian and you're listening and you want to follow a group, these guys might be your folks.
But how do we know if what we are seeing rises to the level of detestation or vilification? The case, Boycott, tells us to look at what are referred to as the hallmarks of hatred. And this is where things get really, really dicey, because some of the hallmarks of hatred are things that people may say regularly, and frankly, should be allowed to say. And Josh gives a few examples in his thread. One hallmark of hatred is blaming a group's members for the current problems in society, alleging that this group is a, quote, powerful menace. So Josh points out that this could capture a lot of EDI training that we see. EDI or DEI consultants talk about white supremacy and white people being a menace in society, that feminists often talk about the patriarchy in these types of terms. Is that hate speech? Does that have the hallmarks of hatred? Even though I don't think that type of training is especially helpful for society or a good thing or a nice way to talk about people, I don't think we should be criminalizing DEI trainers. Another example Josh gives is hate speech, and this is from the Boycott case, quote, further delegitimizes the targeted group by suggesting its members are illegal or unlawful. And Josh points out that we have seen a number of irregular border crossings, in particular in Quebec, and a lot of false asylum claims from, certain countries being made. And if someone is to suggest that these people are illegal or unlawful, will that person be subject to a human rights complaint? I don't think that is an outcome that we would want.
So this is kind of where things are going, where the detestation as a word, what does that mean? She gets into a court case history in Canada about that and their kind of hallways of hate, like the kind of things that could fall into that category. Now, I think where she's wrong is that because it's not a protected group, the DEI training is probably fine and protected, but she's pointing out like a fundamental hypocrisy of this entire system of hate speech.
Just to ask a question regarding the functionality of something like this, is there any evidence that hate speech laws actually reduce the tensions that I think that they're trying to really tackle here?
Well,
do they actually help?
I have a simple way to navigate that. When would you suppose race relations were better in the United States? The 1990s or today?
Probably the 90s.
It's funny how many people feel that way.
I mean, it seems 0 to 10 in the 90s.
Feels that way culturally.
Yeah.
Well, I just think of Rodney King though, so I don't know.
I mean, that's a fair point.
But when we talked about race less, was it better or worse?
Well, there's a very clear hockey stick pattern on a graph if you look up Google searches on and media word usage of. It's in the 2007-2008 time frame where there's just a hockey search or a hockey stick graph goes up and to the right of the amount that the words are used. Right. Which there seems to be, it's entered the lexicon. It's people didn't really think about race relations a whole lot at large. There's pockets of areas and things like that. But then there's a moment where it's all we talked about. It just became a time, and it's probably comes up with Obama getting elected in 2008. Also kind of probably comes up because of the financial crisis in 2008, right? There's a bunch of different reasons of why that is, but there's a moment in time where all of a sudden it's just we're talking about this now and it's all we're talking about, right?
And I wonder, so I don't know how to actually answer the question. I'm not exactly sure that there's data either direction, and it would be difficult to measure exactly sentimentality. If you look at, for example, I know if you look at racist jokes specifically, or do we have data about that, right? So how often people look up racist jokes over time, it seems to be declining over a long period of time. So from the 1950s to today, just racial relations in terms of people wanting jokes apparently is the thing. That's from
the last decade. Everybody just got canceled for it.
Yeah,
right? That's the thing.
There aren't jokes to look up because they're all gone.
Yeah.
Are you saying that you think it's getting better because of that metric?
No. Well, at least that's what Steven Pinker suggests in his book, the moral arc.
So it is
the better angels of our nature. That's
so he would suggest, or he's suggesting in that book, that race relations have gotten better from the 90s to today.
No, from the 50s to today.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So he's talking about in the rates of interracial marriage. That's another one. Okay, I'm starting to remember now. Interracial marriage, interracial children, depictions of interracial couples, things like that have all increased over the same amount of time. and he takes that as an indication that people are fundamentally care less about race. And I think, but the data to that book goes to the mid 2000s. Because it came out in like 2007.
Which is right before the time that I said of everything seeming to spike up. Right?
And I would guess that there's probably something going on there, right? Like as far as, it could be an internet phenomena, right? Tearing things apart, balkanizing, right? Tribalizing is a phenomenon that the internet does. Helps you find other people who have niche interests and also develop niche interests together in like in an echo chamber. So
do you think that there's a potential for a Streisand effect here where because people can't say something, it's going to sort of foment more of that thing?
Yeah. And I also think there's probably like a South Park arc to it, right? Where things become very politically correct. And then all of a sudden there's like a peak moment where we're all like, why are we being so politically correct? And then there's a downslide. And we're probably on the downslide now.
It seems like just what you were saying about like racial jokes. It seems like racial jokes and things like that. A lot of things that were very off topic and we couldn't talk about for the last decade seems to be coming back. Like comedians are making a lot more edgier humor when it comes to like racial jokes. I'm just noticing that like mainline.
I mean, that's how he got canceled originally.
Right.
Yeah.
Racial.
Right. Yeah. Shane Gillis, Andrew Schultz, like they're able to, and they're like the top of comedy right now.
Tony Hinchcliffe at the Tom Brady roast. Pretty un PC.
Yeah. The Tom Brady roast, the Sagar of Breaking Points, he had a really great monologue about how it was a demonstration of that we're past the peak woke moment.
I could see that.
I think it's a pretty good case. There's a lot of edgy humor, really funny.
We might get into that in the the members only
we'll see.
component. So.
And then we also have a tweet from Elon Musk asking about this bill specifically with prior speech. So one of the interesting things, most of the time when you kind of have a new law that comes in, it won't necessarily regulate stuff that happened before the law, right? It's an old it's a key principle of common law that you can't be held accountable for something that you didn't know was illegal, called mens rea, or something that wasn't legal when you did it, or was legal when you did it. But the idea here, but there is a part in here that is concerning on prior speech specifically. Quote: a person who communicates or causes to be communicated hate speech, so long as the hate speech remains public, and the person can remove or block access to it. So if you got hate speech out there online and that's public, it still could be, come up for an actual report and therefore a prosecution of hate speech.
So basically, this is saying that you have to go back through everything you've ever put online and check to make sure that you don't have anything out there that could be interpreted as fomenting hatred.
Well, I don't have to do anything because I'm American, goddammit. And this is for the Canadians. But yeah, if you're Canadian, watch out for your
it's nice. My entire digital identity got erased. So it's nice for me. One of the best things that ever happened to me, really.
So that's really asking, what's the matter for Americans? Well, I really want to make the point that this is an international phenomena, right? When we just released our monologue on the Brazil files. Please like and share and subscribe and push that thing around because we need to get that out there. But what we're seeing is the rise of this global censorship regime. And a lot of these things, a lot of these tools that they have get tested out in other countries before they come to the United States. They start in other places and they're implemented across the board from where they have the open doors at. So there's a series of doors. You have one that's cracked open, Canada, where a lot of people are very, simpy for government there.
It's true.
And
they're awful.
And so that's one of the first places you pass a bill like this, right? So will it ever come to America? It's up to America, right? Is it possible? They're trying to create the mechanisms for that, or do it through what we know from the CTI files and the Brazil X files and other reporting from public, is that there's ways around this, right? Using nonprofit pressure, using people from outside to put pressure to create hate speech, not laws like written on the books, but hate speech norms that companies enforce on behalf of the Aspen Institute or the Atlantic Council.
Would you say that what's going on right now around the anti-Semitism legislation could pretty easily be pivoted to include additional groups going forward? Is this the mechanism they're kind of starting to use?
Well, I think it's a similar kind of groove, but it's very difficult to get out of that groove into actual speech policing beyond online, right? This could, like we said in that last episode, which you go check out about the anti-Semitism bill, is that it impacts things from a chilling speech point of view. causing universities to censor, it doesn't itself censor. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the question is what the secondary order effects of the bill will be, more so than anything else. But that is the sort of, when you zoom out, and this is where you can get way too, like, at least I can get way too autistic about it, right? I'm thinking about the legal code, and then I'm not thinking about the larger culture around these ideas. And the culture around the ideas is what determines the legal code. It's upstream from it, right? So our legal code are going to come from a set of traditions that every time we say, you can't say that, or you if you say that, there's going to be consequences that impact people's courage and inability to speak, the more we're eroding the foundational cultural values around free speech.
Yeah.
Right. And this was argued a lot around the cancel culture era of the last couple of years, but has now suddenly disappeared because of Israel v. Hamas and all that kind of stuff. And lastly, this is an international thing. A big story that came out this last week was a German woman who's actually part of the government, who's actually I think a legislator, right? Yeah, a politician of the AfD party, Miss Kaiser.
Marie Teresa Kaiser.
Yeah. Convicted and fined $6,000. Now, this is a little bit not exactly right as far as, like, her crime wasn't pointing out that immigrants are disproportionately committing sexual assault in Germany. It wasn't the statistics. It was that she generalized, right? So she pointed to the statistics in one thing, and then she extrapolated from the statistics a statement of generalization.
Being that, what?
Afghan immigrants are more likely disproportionately committing sexual assault in Germany.
So that's basically just an interpretation of the data that she shared.
But by doing that interpretation, she generalized, right? She said that Afghans are doing this rather than a significant
criminals who happen to be of Afghan origin.
Yeah. It's not. It's more so like in the statistically more likely versus they are doing this.
Oh, I see.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So she didn't provide for any statistical variability.
Right.
Okay.
And that's that question of it's illegal to make a philosophical error in the state of Germany because they're worried about
prior philosophical errors.
Yes. Yeah. They're worried about the Third Reich, right?
Yeah. Yikes.
Well, her name is Kaiser.
So yeah, this is the sort of thing that is out there. It exists. It is real. You have to contend with it because it doesn't necessarily mean it comes to America straight up, but it is a global phenomenon because we live in a global society online, guys.
Yeah. Well, I mean, populations everywhere, I mean, particularly in the West, are under a lot of pressure from immigration, and Germany's no exception to that. Obviously, we've got that going on in Ireland as well, and that's causing a lot of tension and turmoil, and that's probably some of the root cause of a lot of this kind of, difficulty navigating how we talk about real problems that are existing in our society, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. And the what is within and without the domain of respectable opinion that you can talk about. There's a lot of control people are trying to exercise from the outside. For example, like this politician. But then you have new media figures that are really kind of making their name and trying to articulate this to the broader global world about what's going on in places like Ireland.
Yeah, so what's going on in Ireland right now? Like if you've been online, like you're seeing there's just protests been going on for 2 years now, and they're labeled anti-immigration protests. And it's been going on since about November 2022.
Which we covered some of them on. So for Conor McGregor actually tweeted about it and it blew up really big, circling around the stabbing of a young girl by a
5-year-old girl outside her school.
Yeah.
By a migrant who'd been there for like 20 years. So it's not necessarily the current migrant crisis, but it's a homeless migrant outside of school, camped out, stabbed a 5-year-old girl, right?
And of course, who had a prior criminal history of other knife crimes.
Yeah.
To be clear.
Well, and so one of the big things, I did a little bit of digging into the numbers here, and a lot of people are thinking it's like Middle Eastern immigrants coming up, because that's what a lot of European problems are. But actually, what the numbers that I'm seeing is it's a lot of Ukrainian refugees. So as of January this year, the amount of Ukrainian refugees in the last 10 years that have come in are 104,000 Ukrainian refugees. And to put that in mind, Ireland's population is 5.2 million. So this is about 2% of the population is now Ukrainian refugees that have just come in the last 2 years.
That's wild. I remember we talked about this in the Ireland episode around those protests, and I don't think the number was nearly that high at that time.
Yeah, because when we talked about it, it was like November, because that's when the stabbing happened, I believed.
Yeah.
I believe. And
I want to say it was closer to like 40 or 50,000, but maybe I'm totally imagining that. But
yeah, current numbers that I'm seeing, 104,000. So,
wow.
And it's been months since then, so who knows how many. But also, there's a broader point, and we've talked about this a lot with foreign policy implications leading towards things like our southern border, right? And all these migrants that are coming up through Central America. These are people fleeing their
conflict,
country, right? They're fleeing their country instead. And actually, I have a campaign ad from the Irish First candidate in Ireland right now that I think actually paints the picture a little bit here, and you can kind of see how the rhetoric is going with these types of people.
You blew up for us, you played football with us, you turned on us. It won't be forgotten.
Lock his hand!
Yeah, let him come out! Move street! Move street! Move street! All right, Dublin! There was a young boy in Cork, he was attacked. It's absolutely heartbreaking what that man told me last night. He said he does not know how to handle this. He was a Ukrainian man who was supposed to be fighting in his own country, for his own country. But instead, he's over in my country, raping our children.
So yeah, this is like the rhetoric that you're seeing from the Irish nationalists, and kind of paints the picture of Ukrainian draft dodgers that are fleeing, right, and coming into Ireland right now and causing a lot of these crimes right now. And a lot of them are being shipped into small towns in Ireland. So there'll be these these centers that are formed in little villages of like 200 to 500 people, and then they're just bussing in all these migrants into them and just completely changing the population. And it's all men that are getting shipped into. It's like very few women into these areas, and they're just completely reshaping the structure of these like villages across Ireland.
Wow.
It was episode 48 where we first covered the Ireland thing.
Like half a year
So if
ago.
you want a deep dive, go back and check that out.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we need to be careful not to generalize here, Kyle, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to
$6,000 fine on that.
That's right.
Well, that was in Germany.
This is America. 1776.
We generalize all we want, goddammit.
1776 will commence again.
But yeah, I mean, the question of like, do people feel like this refugee program is working for them is a legitimate question that people should be able to ask.
Yeah.
Now asking that to say that they're all rapists and thieves and things like that, that would be a generalization,
Completely.
right? But if you're saying that this is the importation of some people who are going to stay here permanently or might change my culture, and you get to determine who my neighbors are, people might be upset about that if they don't feel like their will is a part of that. I mean, I'm sure some amount of it's sympathy for refugees, right? But refugees who are male and of that age and things like that, there should be legitimate speech concerns that legitimate ways to talk about it that don't engage in generalization, that are important in something that people can kind of zoom out and say, what's our culture now going to be?
Yeah.
So I just pulled up a video. I'll just have it playing without the audio, but you can see this is in Dublin right now. So just along a river, just all of these tents pitched up.
That's so
across.
upsetting.
Yeah, just everywhere, right?
Could be Seattle.
It could be Seattle. You could imagine this being San Francisco right here.
Interesting how it looks.
You could
like
imagine this being
American city in
Bozeman,
a lot of ways.
Montana.
I was going to say Bozeman too.
Yeah.
Like it's very similar.
Well, you don't see as many tents in Bozeman.
Yeah. It's more campers here.
But it's a very disturbing, and it's interesting that it's from a war, right? Where in the United States we have like the same problem, but it's just drug abuse. And
yeah, I mean, I suppose you could.
Housing.
It's a different war, potentially here, but still a conflict.
Well,
right?
and here's another. So this is again one of these big Irish nationalists protests, large crowds, and here's them chanting here. And Sinn Féin is kind of the Democratic Socialist Party that has a lot of the control. They're kind of like one of the major parties in Irish politics.
What are they saying there?
Sinn Féin are traitors.
Okay.
So massive, and this is one of the themes here, is that you're having a massive cultural shift in Ireland right now, because one of the major things is, so recently their prime minister just got, or he just retired. But it wasn't that he just retired; he retired in shame.
Why?
Because one, the
he was
handling
operating with the information at the time.
He was because he was just operating with the information at the time, nice. And the times have changed. But that actually is kind of relevant here, because the times have changed over the last decade. So you have this guy, and he's a very Trudeau-like figure. He's a very Macron-like figure. I found when I looked into him, they're the same people. Like, they're the same people. They're like these young, fruity guys that have been in politics since their 20s.
Generalizing.
No, but like, they're the same. Like,
2 data points.
It's crazy how similar these people are, and this is where your like conspiracy brain starts to go off, because you're like,
there are 2 of them.
You're like, it's like they're recruiting the same guy. So
wait. Okay, so this Irish prime minister is a lot like Macron, because they're both fruity, right?
But it's also how they come in. So they come in as like the center left, center right. They're kind of in that milieu. Right. They come in, they're like, I'm for free markets and liberalizing the country, and I'm for like all this stuff. It's the same kind of type of rhetoric that comes in, and they're kind of just part of the elite circles at the time. And he's half Indian, and gay. Like, he's actually gay. Like, when I'm saying fruity, like he's actually legitimately gay.
I just thought you use a feminine.
No.
Kyle, you got to choose your language more carefully. We're not trying to get this show labeled as a certain type of thing.
No, but this is important.
Wait,
yeah, for sure.
But is he married to a dude?
This is he is married to a dude,
but that doesn't dress like a lady.
That doesn't dress like a lady. Guys like guys like in his late 30s, like the dude is married
like
to.
Dude. Got it. All right, I'm tracking.
I mean, there's the Macron. Like, again, there's the Macron thing right there. You got the
yeah.
We'll just leave that there to the side. But so he comes in, and he's part of this massive cultural change. So Ireland goes through this kind of, they have like this very rich Catholic history that's very embedded in Irish society, but over recent years, especially in the more metropolitan areas, places like Dublin, you kind of start to have this pushback where we're rejecting the old ways and we're starting to become part of the global society. So we have to reject the traditional structures that we've had, and we got to embrace, and here comes in all the social stuff. So we're going to liberalize abortion, we're going to do all this, and it becomes this thing, and the Irish are kind of like on board for it. But then you have like COVID happen, and and people start to get a little sketched out by that. And then you have this immigration problem that starts to wave in. And then recently, just in March, you have 2 referendums to redefine marriage, family, and women on their constitution.
Oh.
So
that's a pretty substantive change.
And my understanding is this is like adding an amendment to the Constitution. This is their 39th and 40th Amendment here. And one is called 39th Amendment, the family, and the other is the 40th Amendment, care. And what you end up having, so this is kind of part of the globalizing project of like, we're going to have all of this. Yeah, David.
You see the vote count on this?
Yeah, that's what I'm getting into here, right? So you have Irish is going in this very specific direction, and then all of a sudden, all this stuff starts happening, and they completely do a mad correction in their against. So what you have here is the First Amendment. Every single constituency, so like every single county on the vote, voted no except for one, and it's just like, it's basically the DC of Ireland in Dublin. It's like very specific. They're the only ones that voted yes for this redefining of the family on the Constitution.
It lost 70% to 30%.
Wow.
Like, that's huge. That doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, that's a huge margin.
And it's just funny, the family amendment, right?
Yeah, right.
And then the care amendment lost across every single constituency.
Really?
Yeah. And and so it's just this mad rejection because it injects this like it's like injects this woke consciousness into the Constitution, where it's like everything that you're typically used to here, where it's like, let me actually just pull up the referendum. I don't have it directly on.
I got it right here, if you don't mind. I think it's pretty interesting. So the current text on the family, the state recognizes the family as the natural, primary, fundamental unit of society, and as the moral institution possessing inalienable, imprescribable rights, antecedent and superior to all positive law. Which that's a very interesting definition to have for a family. Proposed text changes that to the state recognizes the family, whether founded on marriage or on another durable relationships, as the primary fundamental blah, 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 blah. So, and then on the other part of that, it takes out this next part. So the state pledges itself to guard with special care the institution of marriage on which the family is founded. They want to eliminate on which the family is founded and to protect it against attack. Mm-hmm. So they basically, and gay marriage is kind of what they're signaling to, trying to like acknowledgement of different coupling relationships. And it's kind of getting to that fundamental, like, who is Ireland? Are we a Catholic country? Yep. Are we a tradition? Do we have a tradition? That sort of thing as a core question.
Yeah. And that's kind of the point that I'm getting at here, right? Is that you have kind of what the Irish are feeling. And the Irish has a very rich history of being, what would be the word? Like compelled by higher authorities.
It could have been worse. You could have said uppity, but yeah.
Being compelled by the uppity
being
British
dominated
forces,
by the English.
Right?
Yeah.
And so there's kind of this feeling that Ireland is getting right now where it's just like, no, we just want to do our own thing. Like we were kind of on board with doing like the global European project, but like we're done. Like we want to do us. We want to be Irish. That's what we want to be. And you're just like, you're importing all these people from other countries into our communities, changing the structure of them. And it's like, we don't have a vote for it. It sounds very familiar. Right?
It does. What's interesting here is while they're doing this, Ireland ranks at number 4th as the most free human freedom index country in the world in personal freedom, economic freedom, and human freedom.
Where does the U.S. rank?
Oh, like
we're like 27th or something.
And this one's 17. This is the Cato. This is the Cato one. It weighs individual liberty pretty heavily. So this is without passing this thing. So there are actual rules on the books, like whether or not you're tangibly can be free and be gay and be able to have an alternative lifestyle in Ireland is perfectly fine.
Sure.
It's just that this legal change was an affront to the dominant Catholic culture in Ireland, and they pushed back and demolished it, it looks like.
Well, and the care component, too, is rather interesting. These two clauses of the existing article read, number 1, in particular, the state recognizes that by her life within the home, woman gives to the state a support without which the common good cannot be achieved. And number 2, the state shall therefore endeavor to ensure that mothers shall not be obliged by economic necessity to engage in labor to the neglect of their duties in the home. Very, very traditional language.
Yeah.
The replacement that got voted down reads, the state recognizes that the provision of care by members of a family to one another by reason of the bonds that exist among them gives to society a support without which the common good cannot be achieved and shall strive to support such provision. So basically just removes any language pertaining directly to women and duty to the home, and then the broader societal support that lends.
Well, so one of the things too, so one of the reasons why the Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, resigned was because of the shame of this referendum failure, because these referendums are a very big deal in Ireland, just like the way that their political structure works. It costs a lot of money to get these things put onto the ballot and have them voted on. It's to us in America, it's like, it's not really a lot of money, like in the way that our politics are done, because so much money gets flooded.
We just throw billions of dollars around like crazy.
Yeah, but we're talking like $60 million per referendum, which is like a lot in Ireland. Just for their political process. And to see just this project, because it's kind of part of a larger project, just get rejected in such a fashion was a very shameful thing for this guy, for this prime minister at the time, especially because he's kind of the guy that's been the head of the liberalization project in Ireland for over a decade.
Right. When you look at the nature of the problems and the complaints that the Irish people are having, they're relatively synonymous with problems that Americans are having too, in terms of inflation. Cost of living is exorbitantly high. these are real problems that they're facing. And so to spend $60 million of government money, of taxpayer money to fund something like this, that is an affront to them, that does just get voted down so, across the board. It probably flies in their faces even more. It adds insult to injury, where they're like, well, you could have spent that money caring for your own people. And instead you're trying to kowtow to this, this cultural wokeism that we don't agree with.
Also bizarre too, because I'm pretty sure the Afghanistan and Ukrainian refugees probably don't agree with this kind of legal tradition that they're trying to force into Ireland as well.
Fair point.
Which is very strange.
Well, which
that's always an interesting dynamic with that is like a lot of the people that are actually being busted, like it's not because like there's this broader just like we're going to liberalize the world, we're going to liberalize the West, and we have these very specific values, and we can't tolerate the intolerant and all this stuff, and it becomes this whole thing. But then like a lot of the people that they're bringing in from these other countries that they're trying to equalize, they're not on board with that project either. Like it's just like it's a very,
but it's a compassionate thing to do. Yeah.
So yeah, I want to, and this is this kind of further portrays YouTuber Uber Boyo, who's an old friend of mine. I used to talk with him a lot back in the day, trying to get him on the podcast. But he's kind of my window into Irish politics. And he had some pretty good content on this, showcasing kind of more of the story, because there's a lot of interesting developments here with the riots and how the police are structured as well. And them kind of like outsourcing police from outside of Ireland to come in. And there's a lot of like interesting conspiracies going about with this too, which I think plays an interesting role. So there's
been a confrontation between the Irish native people and the police forces in Ireland that has started to escalate. Videos are coming out of police organizing in battle lines and pepper spraying the locals. Now, this is taking place in a rural town in Wicklow called Newtown Mount Kennedy, near the famous monastery of Glendalough. Now, what is driving all this tension that is leading to the police cracking down on their own citizens? You see, a property in this small town has been designated as a new asylum centre, where a considerably large amount of migrants will be moved in buses and installed in the community. Now, you might say to yourself, why would people protest such a thing? That's very horrible, very backwards. Well, this is because these types of projects do not have a good reputation. I had a cousin who went to America and was surprised to see miles of homeless people leading into California, which he assumed was going to be this sort of heaven on earth. And this seemed very strange and foreign to me until recently you go up to Dublin and you'll see the same thing. Tents all over the inner city streets. And of course, if you question this, you get gaslit. You get told that these poor people are escaping war. But there's a problem with this, because you almost never see young women and families. It's all men that are my age, my height, my size. And so, of course, I understand the people of Wicklow. Why would you want more of me around? I'm a big dork. Imagine 150, 200 of me loitering around your town. I don't think that'd be very nice, would it? And almost the entirety of Ireland has made the decision that they don't want this to happen to their small towns. They don't want busloads of men coming in and getting installed into their communities. It's just not something that they're interested in. Consistently, about 80% of the population have said in polls and votes and surveys that they do not want this to happen. This is not something they think is a priority. You see, the Irish are worried about the housing crisis, the fact that houses are so expensive. They're worried about the rising cost of living. They're worried about the fact that they know people who are Irish, who are from this nation, that are homeless, that don't have houses. And they see it as a misplacement of resources and priorities, where we take all this money and we dedicate it towards these strange importation projects. Now, interestingly, the regime never asked the people if they're down with these projects. Instead, it's just assumed that they've been given power, that they're going to move forward with these types of projects. They cast off a load of political jargon about, the responsibilities towards certain moral principles or something like this, that this stuff must be done. And it's not really a question of consent. Instead, it's going to happen whether you like it or not. And we will bring out riot police if you disagree.
Yeah. Which hits a theme that I talk about a lot about, is like the more underlying moral framework that exists right there, right?
And obviously, concerns that ordinary people have all over the world right now. Cost of living, things are getting harder and harder to afford, but there seems to be a vanishingly small amount of actual attention and effort paid to those things, as opposed to lip service, while the money is actually being pushed towards these kind of agendas.
Yeah. So I have another, and I thought this might spark some debate among us. There was an interesting clip that Steph Uberboyo put out here about immigration as a tool for warfare. And I think we're gonna have I think there's gonna be some contentious ideas here, and okay. I kind of want to have us go through it here. It's kind of like the same format, right? And I think it'll be triggering to a lot of the libertarians in the audience here. But I think it might be fun for us to kind of dive into it, because I think this opens up a broader conversation. This is what's going on in Ireland, but there's also like, we have the contentions with our southern border, also our northern border. We got to keep those Canadians out. But also,
we welcome Canadian patriots who are fleeing the oppressive regime.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and also just like a lot of migrants are coming in from Canada's border. It was Vivek Ramaswamy that kind of opened that up, and everybody was like, what? Huh? Northern border? What?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But yeah, let's dive into this a little bit. I think it could be interesting for us to pick apart.
The former UKIP leader, Neil Hamilton, has just gone on the record as saying,
I think we should send every single illegal immigrant to Britain over to Newry or somewhere like that so that they can walk across the border and seek sanctuary.
My word, that's a heavy-handed statement. This makes me wonder if immigration is not some type of moral, compassionate project that all we Europeans are engaging in, but instead, immigration may be a tool of warfare utilized by bad actors and states to get vengeance upon people they don't like. This UKIP member from the UK is saying that he wants to do this to the Irish because the Irish had some petty problem with him during Brexit. It's all about the border in the north. So he's going to use brown people to punish us. Now, I thought brown people were these poor people from war zones that need to be embraced and taken in with open arms, and they're all individuals and they all have their own destinies and their own lives. But this man sees them as a military division, as a legion, as a barrel of ammunition that he can use to enact his vengeance upon the Irish. Now, you might say, Steph, this is your Irish blood talking. You're just mad at the English as usual. But I actually have receipts on this. You see, lots of states and bad actors utilize immigration in exactly this way, as if it's a weapon of warfare. Take, for example, the Russians, who are currently at war in the east. And up on the top of Russia is Finland, which is one of their primary borders and a country they've always had problems with. Even in World War II, the Finns were a big problem. Now in 2023, you can imagine the Russians were thinking, we don't want any problems from those Finns up north. So they began to do something to destabilize them. This is me reading from an article. Finland is closing all crossings on the Russian border after accusing Moscow of deliberately helping migrants into the country. Around 900 asylum seekers entered Finland from Russia in November, up from fewer than one a day on average. They come from countries including Morocco, Pakistan, and Syria. Finland is determined to put an end to these crossings, says the Prime Minister. The government says Russia is channeling asylum seekers towards Finland in what it calls an influence operation and a hybrid attack. And it has responded by progressively closing more and more border. I have a feeling that...
So what do you guys think about that? It's kind of that general concept.
So first, just some context. One, Ireland is in the EU. Brexit was Ireland leaving the EU. Mm-hmm. The UK Independence Party, UKIP, is the principal reason why the UK left the EU. Predominant among them was the inability for the UK to control their immigration policy because they were in the EU. So this irony here is, I see that this isn't his point, but the irony here is this UKIP guy probably actually agrees with Steph in that the immigrants can change your country, can change your culture, can be used as a tool for warfare. The UKIP is actually famous for being a reduced immigration policy party, despite that not being very popular throughout their creation and their kind of late 90s, early 2000s into the present day. So, not saying that disqualifies his point. Just saying that it's an interesting part of the context I think people might miss.
And just to be clear, you did say Brexit was Ireland leaving the EU.
So I mean,
that was
England
leaving.
Yeah, the UK.
Yeah.
They're all the same.
Yeah.
These Anglos.
They're all very close to each other.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's like one island, another island. It's all the same. One's just the peasants to the other. I don't know.
and I don't know what the beef was that he was making the recommendation to send those folks there, but he's very specifically saying that because using immigrants as a tool to punish the Irish for something is a very UKIP way to look at it, because they see it as a punishment too for the UK to have these immigrants.
Interesting. So I guess where you're probably coming from with regard to how contentious this is for libertarians specifically is the open borders, closed borders question.
Yeah.
Right. What do you think?
Well, so my opinions on immigration as a whole are very. I hate the open versus closed border argument. I think it's very low resolution and very surface level of just being like, close the border, open the border. Immigrants good, immigrants bad. Like that's not, I don't think that's the proper way to look at it. I view, let me use like an analogy. I view immigration kind of like a fire. Fire is very useful for crafting and innovating and things like that. But fire can also burn down the village if it gets out of hand. And I think that there's like a very specific equilibrium point. And one of the biggest problems is that we have states doing manipulative statecraft things, and they're trying to, over immigrate people for the sake of cultural instability. And that's the fire burning down the thing. So it's like immigration is very good because you can recruit the best players from all around the world, and you can bring them into the society, and you can do all that stuff. And that's very positive immigration, right?
For sure.
But when you go overboard and you kind of surpass the equilibrium, like it's kind of like prices, there's a certain price and you got to key in on the right one. And I think free markets are better at doing that than, the statecraft stuff. And that's the libertarian side of me. But the cultural instability is what we're kind of watching now at play. And this is the statecraft warfare that is happening and how it's used as a weapon. And when we look at empires falling in the past, right? Rome is always the primary example of them overexpanding, them diluting their money supply, them taking in everybody, and it became way too culturally unstable. And it just caused this mess of just a lot of variables all kind of come in. But the immigration, the migration, the cultural instability is one of the key factors, one of the major variables, not the only one, but one of the major variables that led to the fall and tends to be a major factor in leading to the fall of empires as a whole, right?
Yeah.
That's the way that I see the immigration argument.
So whether or not the immigration as a tool of state warfare is true or not, the effect that it's having is destabilizing. To what degree is actually policing crime a factor here? Because in a lot of these cases, these cities and towns don't have to have laws in the books that allow for street camping. They don't have the resources maybe to house all these people, but they can at very least actually prosecute crimes when they happen and, deport criminals back to, where they came from. But that's not really happening. So to what degree is that a component of this?
Well, I think that's going to be a major component, right? Because not only are you bring more resentment because you're importing a bunch of people with different beliefs, different cultural backgrounds, all this stuff, and it's creating tensions in a society, but it's also messying the society. It's creating instability in these villages that are happening in Ireland, right? People that, if people come in and they don't necessarily speak the same language or they don't share the same values, that's difficult for the cohesion of a society, right?
And that may, in fact, exacerbate the tendency for people to generalize the actions of one to the actions of a collective, right?
And that's where it gets difficult, right? Because we set immigration policy based upon these very vague, large buckets rather than on individuals, right? It's always difficult to know which of the individuals are going to be the best for the social order. That's why the knowledge problem is such a key component of this issue, right? Demand for labor is a better indicator than what your trade union laborers decide how much competition they want to face, or how much a legislator believes what's compassionate. The degree of compassion is very difficult to know, right? Especially because you're playing with other people's communities' lives and things like that.
Yeah.
But demand is, somebody who is, I need labor in this way. I feel like a immigrant would satisfy this labor demand. Therefore,
GDP number go up.
Yeah.
And that's what they're looking at, right?
Yeah.
But they're not looking at all the other underlying factors that also exist because you're mass importing people into a specific location. It's very easy to be in the high tower in DC and be like, ooh, immigration number equals GDP number. Ooh, GDP go up. That good.
Yeah,
right?
And even that's not really how most of our immigration policy is set, right? Most of our immigration policy is set by trade union protectionism, right? So the question to me is how, if you play that story backwards, if you go back I don't know about the Irish case. Obviously, immigration to Ireland is a very different story now than it used to be, because it's a much richer country now than it used to be, freer country now than it used to be, and it's part of the EU. So it can't really control its own immigration policy, which I totally see as the biggest problem here, right? To me, it seems like an autonomy problem of the people on the ground whose local authority is being usurped by either the national government to the EU itself. And that's just the problem with the project of the EU, is it just has way too much power. It should be a broad protection agency for Europe for security, and it should be a common trade zone, and that's it. And if you want to do immigration, stuff like that, you should devolve that down to local. I see the same problem in the United States, is that, it looks like a problem that the feds handle poorly because of the perverse incentives that they have, while individual states could probably handle that better.
I have a question on this, the demand for labor part. Do we have an accurate picture of demand for labor? Because it's been often criticism of the Biden administration, or the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that they'll bring out like a jobs number, and then it'll be revised several months later after it's had its impacts on the economy. But obviously they're not telling the truth up front about what our labor situation is.
Right. That's the problem with socialism, right? Is you always have a lagging indicator of numbers that you're trying to plan society on, versus a price mechanism, which is dynamic and in the moment and based on local knowledge rather than top-down knowledge, right? So that localized knowledge is much better at responding to the actual conditions on the ground. What I think we know about the latent unsatisfactory demand for labor is illegal immigration as a measure of that, because to the degree that illegal immigrants come here, get a visa to falsify, or not a visa, but the documentation to falsify for tax purposes and then work, is a lot of the illegal immigrant population. The illegal immigrant population has, as far as I understand, and I'm open to being corrected about this, but as far as I understand, has a very similar set of demographics to the rest of the population when it comes to how many people work, how many people don't work. Most people work, not everyone does. But and some of those people are on social programs, but it's not really much more than the native-born population. We're not Sweden, right, where we actually prohibit people who are immigrants from working here. If you're an immigrant in the United States, you can find work, you get work. Yeah. And for the most part, that's what happens.
Well, there's an interesting point there. This is anecdotal, but I was chatting with a former member of Bozeman PD who was talking about, and this is a side point, but the presence of the cartels here in town, which they're predominant, not just for drug trade, but also for human trafficking, and not just for sex work, but also for labor. How he was talking about how people will come here because there's a booming, construction economy going on with all the buildings going on here, Big Sky, wherever, and these people are living in very poor conditions, right? 10, 15 people to a home that's designed to support 4 or 6, and they're being exploited for their extremely cheap labor. So to what degree is that component driving a lot of this, where builders, companies, whatever, are they know that they can exploit people on their labor force?
But that's a feature. That is a consequence of the black market of labor that's established by the immigration cap.
So what we should do is broadly liberalize and open up legal immigration and be more strict on illegal
Now,
immigration.
the question then, and the other side of that, is always the cultural arc, which is what you're arguing, right? Which is that you lose something when you change up the demographics of the country. Now, the question is when you play that story backwards, historically, we were really upset about the Asians, right? And then we were really upset about the Irish, and we were really upset about the Germans, and we were really upset. And like at least in America's case, in hindsight, every time we look back about the big change that was about to happen because of the last wave of immigrations, it didn't actually change our institutions that much. In fact, it transformed our culture and made our culture better, right? The Irish made our culture way better. We have all of our cuss words because of it. You're welcome. Also, a lot of our dancing.
Fair point.
Yeah. Immigrants from across the Caribbean made huge changes in our culture. There's tons, and there's so many examples of how it made our world better and more rich and more vibrant and interesting. Although, I get it, our institutions are falling apart right now. I don't know if that's the fundamental cause of that's immigration. I think the fundamental cause of that might have something to do with ideas introduced from the Marxist side of Europe not from.
It seems to be much
immigrants.
more just like white women.
You said it.
Liberal white women are to blame for all of our problems.
It isn't Jorge. It's Jessica. Sorry, not my wife, Jessica.
That's your wife's name.
Yeah, I know, but you know what I mean. White girls.
Karen.
It's Karen.
Yikes.
Well, yeah, because I think a lot of this, one, we are a much bigger country. And I think because we are like a confederation of countries, so that we have like a bunch of different cultures, like the culture in Montana is very different than the culture in California, right? Where Ireland is 5 million people and it's an entire nation in and of itself. So there's a much different like population thing where it's like, if you're Irish, you're Irish. Where like, if you're American, it's like, okay, which American?
Yeah.
Right? Like, and that's
America?
a much different thing.
That's
right?
from the Civil War movie, right? Yeah. We're American is like, what kind? You know? Yeah, what kind? But I think you're right. And actually that's kind of what I was diving at like the local control part. And that's why I feel like America's kind of messed up, right? Is because we don't have a kind of localized control of immigration that would, I think, empower people on the ground to feel like, okay, there's some amount of control I have. If that's it's either that or let the market determine it, but don't let the federal government control it because it's just such a perverse incentive.
Well, and there's the thing is like the EU argument, right? Like looking at Ireland's place in the EU is actually much more like looking at Montana's place in the United States, right? Where the EU and the United States are honestly more comparable as like, it's like the European empire and the American empire. And then you have a bunch of subcultures within that are kind of dictated by the different states in the same way that the EU would be like, okay, are you French, Irish, whatever, right? And that might be more so the way to look at it. And we just kind of get muddied because like, we have this very vast, broad amount of land with a massive amount of population, but we have all these different cultures in it that exist, and all those cultures are kind of competing for control over the much larger apparatus in a sense. That doesn't necessarily defined by state lines, but like that's kind of
I think you're
you
right.
gotta see where I'm getting at.
I think you're right,
Yeah.
and that's why you get the coastal phenomena, you get the flyover state phenomena, you get like the country versus like the urban phenomena, right?
Yeah.
And that I think there's something there with that where if you're from the country, you're more likely skeptical of outsiders, right? Because in general, you're trying to preserve something. You're going to be more traditionalist by nature. And if you're more cosmopolitan, you're going to be more open to it and open to the transformation in the future. Now, the question is like, what should guide our destiny here? Should we allow individuals to themselves make decisions that are best for them? That would indicate to me to be a relatively open immigration policy. And maybe there's some degree in which it's too open. To me, I'm always willing to kind of like press that outer line because, you know, as long as we're not bringing in force to train institutions from the outside, if you're allowing immigrants to come in only because of a terrible asylum system that doesn't know who's coming in, or it incentivizes and creates illegal immigration where we don't know who's coming in, we don't know who's an individual who is of quality character and things like that. Like what I mean is like history of crime or whatever in their home country. That's the worst outcome possible, right? And that would make me an opponent of the status quo.
Yeah.
Right. We'll try to understand where they're coming from, right? They don't know who these Ukrainians are potentially, is how the people on the ground feel. So they don't know if they can trust their new neighbors, which sounds like a terrible position to put those folks in.
Yeah. I mean, there's this other piece too around the warfare question that pertains to political warfare. I think a lot of people on the American right would say they're concerned that the Biden administration has a very liberal illegal immigration policy because they're trying to bring in a flood of voters to entrench their political power. Is there a component there? And I don't know if that plays into the Irish concerns as well, if any of that came up.
But it's similar though. I mean, that is a form of political warfare, right? I mean, he's saying
remember, like
international.
we were looking at 2% of the population is now these last 2 years.
I mean, that's the margin of an election potentially. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what their voting, capabilities are in Ireland, but I doubt they can just like vote.
Is there a pathway to citizenship? How does it work? I don't know.
I have no idea.
Well, it seems there's a concern.
We got to ask Ruben Boyle, man, get Steph on to tell us what's up with it.
Is that going to become a thing? I mean, I know that there's been rumblings of the Biden administration trying to grant voting rights to illegal immigrants in the U.S.
We were looking at it before, and there was something about the census, correct?
Yeah.
And how we're counting immigrants, migrants, non-documented migrants, in the census. And that would have to do with proportionality of control of the Electoral College, as well as proportionality of control for House seats. And that would change the balance of power. I assume that would have to pass the filibuster proof in the Senate. and that doesn't seem likely with the Republicans controlling the House and enough Republicans that have the Senate.
I see.
There is an element too here, and I won't go into the video, but there was a video of basically it was discovered that, and I think this gets into the feel of the Irish sentiment right now, is that there's outside forces kind of controlling their destiny, where they have a lot of these police in the riot gear, they have like British accents. So like, and apparently they're Garda or whatever it's called, like their police. Gardy. They're Gardy. He's Irish.
Especially when you put that slight Canadian thing in there, like Gardy.
The Gardy. Like they're actually just outsourcing non-EU British people to come, or like British like companies, for their recruitment and competition processes for the recruitment of their police that are coming in. And there, it reminds me of I remember there was a big fiasco here in the States of there was a bill that was introduced trying to grant like a route to citizenship by joining the military. And that becomes one of those things where it's like, okay, the people that are protecting you are people that don't necessarily have your cultural values, right? And that becomes a very concerning, and they're not American. And it's like, you can maybe control them a little bit easier because you're putting certain incentives like carrot on a stick in front of them, and the people in power can kind of use that. Like there's an element there that I think is very interesting and kind of potentially nefarious that exists there.
For sure. I recall there being a similar concern in the US in the last maybe 15 or so years about UN soldiers being brought to serve as sort of like National Guard in the US, where you have the same problem, right? You have troops patrolling streets that maybe that don't have any like sort of familial or community attachment to the people that they're policing, which can present a pretty adversarial dynamic.
Which makes you think about all of our police actions in places like the Middle East, where how these people feel about, there's these foreign soldiers telling me what I can and can't do and controlling my city, right? It's the same type of feeling that exists. It starts to make you feel like you're an occupied geographical location, rather than like you having actual control over your governance and like, we're the government, we're the people, like all those mythologies, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Do note though, we've had naturalization through service in the U.S. military for a very long time. Just saying. So
what was the bill?
Immigrants getting traced along the citizenship pathway by service in the U.S. military has been done forever.
Yeah, there was a specific thing that happened last year. I don't have it off the top of my head. There was something around
there's
that.
Probably something that accelerated that or made it quicker to get to citizenship. Naturalization's not the same thing as citizenship, but it's like on the pathway. So
there was a senator or something. I can't remember. I'm just talking off the top of my head here, but it was like him talking about like, well, we're not getting enough American soldiers coming in, so we have to like majorly up our immigrant processes, kind of a thing, right? Like, it's that.
Yeah, Machiavelli is rolling in his grave right now.
Yeah.
All right, so I think that stretches it. That's the Irish topic. That was good. Good comment. All right, so we got a couple more stories to hit you guys with, just some continued stories, and then we'll circle around one more ESG example. I think that happened this week, and a win for the anti-ESG movement that happened. Not anti-ESG, but just a win for boycotts.
A win for gamers.
Yeah, what am I talking about? ESG.
Gamers. Gamers rise up. Yeah. War on gamers.
It's a war on everybody right
so
now.
TikTok, which was, remember it got crammed in with all the ban for that, got crammed into that big funding bill, some money for Israel. You get money, everyone gets some money.
Not me though.
Yeah, not us. Just foreign governments.
Yeah.
So that was signed by Biden. TikTok is now suing the government. They released what the lawsuit looks like. I think it's a very interesting moment where they're arguing that this is a First Amendment issue, and on First Amendment grounds, that people have a right to be able to communicate on a platform that doesn't censor them, and that's the angle that they're taking.
Sure.
Now they kind of there was a great New York Times article that basically said they threw the First Amendment kitchen sink at the government. They made tons of arguments, all circling around that.
Yeah.
There was some fake news that came out, specifically over a claim that the argument that they make, one of the arguments that they make in their lawsuit, was that the Chinese government actually owns TikTok because it's prohibited in where they're based out of Hong Kong, ByteDance, to export an algorithm to a foreign adversary.
People from China, they love me.
Exactly. So this was fake news because they indicated that meant that ByteDance was owned by China. It actually just means that ByteDance is regulated by China, which isn't the same as a statement as they were being owned by. And there are a group of people who are trying to muddy that water to act as if you are regulated by the U.S. government, right? You can't employ somebody for $4 an hour, right? You have to do the minimum wage. Therefore, the U.S. government owns your business. This is how their argument goes.
Yeah.
And specifically when it comes to this case, it's export control. So they place rules around what you can do with your export of software in China. And those rules are bad, and we don't like those rules. And part of the kind of the best argument for the TikTok kind of regulation or banned argument is the lack of like mirrored rules the U.S. has when it comes to this stuff. It's an argument. I'm not sure if it's a good one, but at least it's there. That the Chinese banned the export of that algorithm, and the U.S. is demanding that they sell it. So they're like, "How we can't do this and still be compliant with Hong Kong rules?"
Sure.
So,
is there any complexity around Hong Kong versus China? Because I know they're sort of like independent, but they're not. Like, how does that?
Well, they
play
were
in?
independent. They were a British holding, right? Until the British said in like 30 years, at some point, they're going to transfer over to China because they're part of China, right?
Yeah.
And it was from their colonial past that they had that. So Hong Kong, one of the wealthiest areas in that area, in that region of the world, in part because of British colonial rule, basically giving them a very common law approach to how to deal with regulations and labor and commerce. They became incredibly rich. China takes over, basically on a handoff, a peaceful handoff from the British to them. Well, sorry, from relative independence to them. And then in the last couple of years, there's been a couple election cycles in there that have undermined their local control and seen more be kind of taken by the Chinese government.
I see.
Which is all bad, and I disagree with. That said, this is the reality of the world stage that we're in.
Yeah. Well, and there was some stuff that came to light around some of the underlying reasons why the TikTok ban might have happened. Do we have...
Yeah, we stipulated this at the time, and we did get some quotes from like Marsha Blackburn and other folks, but we didn't really have this much clear, talk from, in this case, our favorite hot dog lover, Mitt Romney.
Well, and that's the interesting thing here is we have all the greatest hits of neoconservatism, right? You have Anthony Blinken, Mitt Romney at the McCain Institute. It's all the greatest hits. But yeah, they're talking about the TikTok ban a little bit, and maybe one of the reasons why it was so important.
The PR been so awful? I know that's not your area of expertise, but you have to have some thoughts on that, which is, I mean, as you said, why has Hamas disappeared in terms of public perception? An offer is on the table to have a ceasefire, and yet the world is screaming about Israel. It's like, why aren't they screaming about Hamas? Accept the ceasefire, bring home the hostages. It's said it's all the other way around. Typically, the Israelis are good at PR. What's happened here? How have they and we been so ineffective at communicating the realities there and our point of view?
How this narrative has evolved? Yeah, it's a great question. I don't have a good answer to that. One can speculate about what some of the causes might be. I don't know. I can tell you this. We were talking about this a little bit over dinner with Cindy. I think in my time in Washington, which is a little bit over 30 years, the single biggest change has been in the information environment. And when I started out in the early 1990s, everyone did the same thing. You woke up in the morning, you opened the door of your apartment, your house, you picked up a hard copy of the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. And then if you had a television in your office, you turned it on at 6:30. Or 7 o'clock and watch the national network news. Now, of course, we are on an intravenous feed of information with new impulses, inputs every millisecond. And of course, the way this is played out on social media has dominated the narrative. And you have a social media ecosystem environment in which context, history, facts get lost, and the emotion, the impact of images dominates, and we can't discount that. But I think it also has a very, very, very challenging effect on the narrative.
Yeah, a small parenthetical point, which is some wonder why there was such overwhelming support for us to shut down potentially TikTok or other entities of that nature. If you look at the postings on TikTok and the number of mentions of Palestinians relative to other social media sites, it's overwhelmingly so among TikTok broadcasts. So I'd note that's of real interest, and the president will get the chance to make action in that regard.
Yeah, and we pulled that from Breaking Points or Counterpoints, their spinoff show.
Their new one.
Yeah, their second,
which is really great. Subscribe to those guys; they're awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you guys think about that? It's just such a
let's
dip of the cards.
let's translate it a little bit. So we used to have a single focal point of where all the information came from, and we could determine those are the facts. Now there's a bunch of other places that people are able to get information from. And so it's really hard to determine what the facts are because there's so many different bombarded with an intravenous feed is what he described it as. So now there's just so much information flowing in, and there's no longer a central fact-making kind of point. There's no longer the lens. There's like the very specific keyhole lens.
What happened to our keyhole?
I like how he said it's been challenging to the narrative.
It has been challenging.
Good.
To the narrative that they want to control so that you believe the right things about this time, in this case, the war in Palestine.
Yeah. I mean, should we be surprised that they were so overt with saying this out loud?
They're talking amongst their people. Right?
Yeah.
It's the McCain Institute.
It is there.
Well, but in this intravenous internet age, we can end up with clips like this, and they can circulate around, and people can see truly how the leaders of the world are looking at how they want best to manipulate and control people via information.
Yeah, and TikTok knows that this is why, right? Everyone knows this is why. The scary thing is the degree to which a bunch of people are basically saying, yeah, but they're owned by the Chinese, so that's all that matters. There's like a coalition, a bootlegger Baptist thing going on here, where there's a lot of people who don't really care that much about Israel, who do care about China, who are supporting the ban. There's a bunch of people who are on that, I'm establishment media and I care about Israel, but I don't want the competition from TikTok, who are like just being quiet. There's a ton of that. Additionally, just the perverse incentives of, where Congress is at in the relationship with this whole issue. They'll vote for anything at this point if the right groups get behind it.
It's all about the greater good.
Good.
And speaking of which, the Biden administration put a hard red line, says you will not invade Rafah, Israel. And they said, that's interesting. And then now they're invading Rafah. But it doesn't count because it's just a limited operation, is what they said at one point. And then like a day later, they said, well, actually, we're going to hold up shipments. And it does count, but it's not crossing the red line. That doesn't mean they've caught the red line, but we are holding up shipments. But it's just a limited operation. You get the point.
Yeah.
The Biden administration's trying to have it three different ways simultaneously. They're saying you can't press, but if you did, okay, you did, but as long as it's limited, and so okay, it's limited, but we're gonna hold up the ammunition, but you still didn't actually violate the red line.
The administration's in such a weird spot right now because they have to appeal to so many different groups that are just like, some are on board with it. Then there's like this large campus protesting environment that exists,
which is a lot of their base that they need, right?
It's a very strange environment that they have to. But also, he just has all this AIPAC money. It's like.
They're in
the words.
spot.
You can't say those words.
AIPAC is an organization that exists. They exist. Am I not supposed to notice that?
No, you don't notice. I'm noticing. So yeah, exactly. It's an interesting moment that we're at because we were speculating. Okay, what does this mean? Especially in the tit for tat going on between Iran and Israel, and what that meant for Rafah and additional operations into the southern parts. So they've pretty much started up north and got a city, pushed things down. A lot of the migrants got pushed down, not migrants, I'm saying refugees. And now they're trying to push them kind of out to the east. to new migrant camps out there after they've gone south in order to try to recontrol the border to Egypt, and what that means for guns and manufacturing and stuff like that running between a supposedly tunnel problem that they have between Egypt and Palestine.
Oh, that's actually another area that we didn't even mention in the Irish stuff. Is the Israel stuff is a large portion to, again, Irish first movement, Irish nationalism. We don't want to send all the support. There's a bunch of Irish leaders that are like Irish influencers and things like that are like Irish Jewish that are just like, it's no longer safe in Ireland, I'm moving to Israel, and it's become like this big thing. That's like another area of the Irish first stuff, nationalism that's going on too.
Yeah, because the Irish
is
are
interesting. Yeah.
Classically very sympathetic to the Palestinians. So,
the Irish are.
Yeah.
Well, because
I guess that would make
they kind of
sense.
view themselves in a similar light, right?
Yeah. But they see Israel, and this is a common framework that some people use as Israel is like a Western European colonial project.
Sure.
Right, which they're not a big fan of
and
that.
they see themselves as a Western European colonial project. Like that's what they tried to do to us, and then we kind of fought back against it or gained our freedom. We kind of,
Yeah.
But then they got free and they got wealthy, and then they joined the EU, which was whoops.
And now they're kind of like,
crap.
Maybe we shouldn't have done that.
So that's some updates on that. Ammo shipments and weapons are currently being held on the performance of something, of what. It's very unclear from the administration, but essentially they're saying as long as this operation doesn't turn into a larger operation, you can still get your
They really just
guns
needed
and
one
money.
news cycle to get out to the campuses to
Yeah.
say, hey, look, we're with you.
Yeah.
Just enough.
Being really hard on them.
Just
Take that.
stay with us, guys.
Yeah.
We just need you through November, okay?
Okay, so and then speaking of in our attempts of managing democracy and what we're doing here.
Good transition.
Good transition.
Manage democracy.
So what is going on with the gamers and this Helldivers 2 boycott?
All right,
Because
so-
Helldivers 2, for people that don't know, it was a very big popular game that came out recently, and it kind of went against everything that's been going on in the gaming industry, especially with all this ESG stuff. They just kind of did their stuff, made a good game, didn't care,
And David, you made a really great monologue about that, and you can find it on our YouTube channel. You should go check it out.
Yes, and it's got some really great gameplay of me playing it as well, and I'm an excellent gamer.
Gamer.
No, it was not. It was actually embarrassing sending it to Ben. Just this is how terrible I am. So what happened was at launch, it allows crossplay, right? So PC gamers can play with Xbox gamers, or not Xbox, it's not on Xbox, PlayStation gamers. So PlayStation and PC can play together. You can buy it on Steam, which is like the largest outlet for buying video games on PC. And then they said, as of was it 2 weeks ago, they said, we're going to force everyone to have a PlayStation login and log into the PlayStation basic authentication system. Now, how does this connect to ESG? This connects to ESG because it was specifically, according to one community manager at Arrowhead, who is the maker of the game, and of course, all the community managers are all DEI type people, which has been a very interesting revelation, is from this one to another game drama called Stellar Blade, and the censoring of Stellar Blade, what's revealed is a lot of these community managers, and these are the people who manage the Discord channels and are supposed to be the front line and dealing with the customer and creating a positive culture for the customers, or a lot of them are all kind of DEI people. And if you guys know what I mean by DEI people, they're very much they're about the movement, the woke stuff.
Yeah.
So
I plead the fifth.
A lot of these fresh out of college type of, because it's often
Yeah.
a job for in your 20s kind of a thing.
Yeah, and it's your first foot in the door in the gaming industry, I think, for a lot of these folks. So they after they implement this new policy where you have to sign up for PlayStation Network, even though you're playing on PC, which wasn't a requirement for crossplay before, is now suddenly going to be a big issue. Gamers start criticizing. These community managers start basically just blocking everybody and censoring everybody and basically saying, no, this results in it. You want to click on the PC Gamer link here. I'll show the kind of demonstration of what happened. It blows up huge in their face. One of the reasons why this happens, one of the motives, was because PlayStation has a more constrained use agreement, when you can be banned from the game, than Valve does, which is the maker of Steam. So if you go down a little bit, there's a chart of the negative reviews that happened because of this, which is really the forcing function. Boom.
Whoa. So we're looking at a chart here of
the reviews.
Of recent reviews. They're generally positive from April 8th, it looks like, all the way through the end of the month of April, where you start to see some negative reviews trickle in. And then as of just after the 1st of May, we have 20,000 negative reviews as compared to maybe several hundred to a couple thousand positive reviews kind of trickling along.
Mm-hmm. Well, out of 70,000 total reviews.
Yeah, so we have 20,000 negative reviews out of almost 70,000 total.
And the game was overwhelmingly positive before this. It was almost no negative reviews. The biggest criticism the game had before then was that the anti-cheat software it had to put on PC was kind of constrictive or kind of invasive. So this happens, huge review bomb, huge drama. It comes out that the reason that people start looking in these community managers have all these online posts hating gamers, basically saying, oh, the biggest problem in gaming is white males. Things like that, right? Which is like the demographic of your average gamer, right?
Yeah.
And then, we need to make space and gaming's for women, all that stuff. And then one of them actually admits that the reason why they're doing this connection with PlayStation is because they can ban people more easily because they have a tighter terms of service, et cetera, et cetera. And then next thing you know, it is everywhere, all over the internet, that Helldivers 2 is doing this thing and it's ESG, DEI motivated. And then something amazing happens.
What happened?
They bend. They give. Sony, who's the distributor, is the one forcing this whole thing to Arrowhead to do this whole thing. Eventually, Sony says, "Okay, you guys. We've heard you. We're not gonna force PC players to sign up for PlayStation Network in order to access the game." The reviews now bump way back up. I couldn't find them more recently, but you can see the same chart, and you'll see this huge responding 10,000 new positive reviews in the games as people change the reviews.
Very cool.
And so it's a great example. People will poo-poo consumer boycotts all the time, but it's a great example of how this happens. And how it happened was meme warfare. It didn't happen because of something straight up. It happened because of jokes and people saying this is BS and speaking clearly about that, but then creating the memes around it and the how playing on the playfulness of the game, into the themes of the game, into the reviews, into everything. That's really it's a very fascinating observation of kind of the mass movement that the internet
sees
created.
The memes of production.
That's right. That's right.
I have a bit of a gaming anecdote, but it does apply to this. Something I noticed recently was so Hades is one of my favorite games of all time. It's like a roguelike game. You're going, working all these gods to fight Hades. It's like a whole thing. But Hades 2 just went into early access a couple days ago, and I dipped my toes into it a little bit, just went and played a little bit of it. And something I noticed a little bit of DEI influence. It's not super invasive, but I just noticed it was racial changes to a bunch of the gods. It's like very subtle racial changes, like Apollo, black. Hermes, I think you notice like some Asian influence there.
These are Greek gods. To be
Greek gods, right? Like, and that's the whole, everything's Greek mythology.
Yeah.
Hestia, Irish for some reason. So it's not even like necessarily like the skin color thing. It's just they're
diversity.
not Greek.
Yeah.
They're not Greek. Like Hestia is like this Irish grandma.
Well, you got to have a ginger in there somewhere.
Yeah, which I think which seems kind of like
Ginger
a trope because
representation.
Hestia is the goddess of fire and she's all red.
Uh-huh.
So there's kind of a is that racist? I don't know.
We like that trope.
I'm not sure. I'll get back to you.
Also, something I noticed is what is like the blacksmith god Hephaestus? Yeah, in a wheelchair.
Well, he is like a limp or like cripple, but like
is he? Yeah. I just noticed it, and I was like, there's an interesting thematic.
Hephaestus not crippled.
Doesn't he have like
in Greek mythology?
Doesn't he have like a limp or something? Like, isn't he like deformed in some way?
I'm not sure. It was just something I noticed going through where you're like, it wasn't like very invasive in the gameplay or anything. Gameplay, awesome, incredible, especially in early access, like really incredible game. But I just noticed like, there's the DEI check the boxes across the gods, just like these subtle changes in the artwork kind of a thing. It was interesting.
So would you rather put up with a little bit of that or have a game ruined and have to be boycotted and go through the whole thing of like bending back to what it was.
These were subtle changes that I didn't really have a massive problem. Like I didn't have a problem with, like it didn't change my experience at all. So like I would much more rather deal with that, but it's me noticing the check the box.
And is it a slippery slope? Potentially to more of that sort of thing.
Yeah, probably.
They're kind of just starting to feather it in there a little bit.
Yeah. They're a good game studio. Like as long as they're making a good game, like it does not interfere with the game, but like other games, it becomes a thing that very much interferes. It interferes with the narrative, it interferes with that stuff, and you just notice it, right? And it becomes much more cognizant. You're like, I'm being manipulated right now. Like you just like feel it. Not noticing that with this. I just noticed the check the box pattern that existed, and it's just a little anecdote.
Yeah, there's also a lot of male gaze engagement around Hades 2, as well as Stellar Blade, right? Where it's like, oh man, we're very uncomfortable with this game because men might be sexually aroused by it. Yeah.
Oh, male gaze.
Aphrodite, the goddess of love, is quite curvaceous.
And you're right. Hephaestus fell, and he had like a disabled like limp.
Yeah.
But he's not in a wheelchair because wheelchairs didn't exist.
No, I know. But I mean, if any character were to be in a wheelchair,
it makes sense.
I will say it made sense to me thematically because he's like the tinkerer. So I was like, oh, that's kind of like an interesting take. Like I noticed the check the box, but I'm like, that's an interesting way of doing it. It actually makes sense. Yeah. Like it was pretty well done actually.
Yeah, I mean, I still think it's a little ridiculous, but like of any character, it does make sense for him to be in a wheelchair.
As long as it's narratively consistent, right?
Yeah. Right.
Like you said, didn't interfere. Yeah. Well, guys, I think that's been a really great show.
Well, the show's not over. We're going to members only from here, right?
That's right. We're going to go behind the mysterious paywall. And if you would like to join us there, we would love to have you. Please go to humanreactionpod.com. On there, you can see all the ways to support us. If you become a Nuclear Reactor member, you will get access to all of our exclusive content. Also, if you sign up on Substack as well, we will be sending these members-only videos to you there via Substack as well. So for everybody else, we appreciate you very much for watching. Hope you like, follow, subscribe, and shoot us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And members, we will see you in the members-only section. Thanks, guys. Thanks for tuning in to Human Reaction. Please be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And if you want to become a member and support the show financially, check out humanreactionpod.com. And remember,
I was going with the information I had at the time.